And then approximately 6:30 a.m. the next morning, Halloween morning, Cleophas Martin found her. Cleophas was a groundskeeper at RCC. This area to the right here is the entrance into the quadrangle area, and also would have led you to where the library would have been. And to the left there, you can see the general area where the four men were hanging out on October 30th, across from where Cheri parked. Cheri parked right about here, and right about here roughly is where the four men were hanging out. And here are some other angles of those two locations, just so you can see from a different viewpoint of where the car was parked and the approximate area of the four men. So I found these reference photos here from a 1955 to 1956 RCC catalog. A nice aerial shot. Now I don't know what year these were taken, because this same photo has appeared in other years, but the earliest I found was this one here from 1955 to 56. And well, you can see here the two annex houses. You can see one complete house, and then you see like a portion of the next house, and Cheri was found right in between here. Here's another angle of the quadrangle from the 1954 to 1955 catalog. Again, I don't know what year that is, but I kind of get caught up in trying to find precise and accurate areas pertaining to these crimes. One thing that's confused me though, and I can't really figure out, is as to where Cheri parked her vehicle. Now I know it's been documented and it's been said she parked here, but from these photos it doesn't appear that anyone is parking on Terracina. As you can see, doesn't mean they didn't, doesn't mean they don't on Sundays when it's just a library open. Maybe they did, but from these photos here, you can see around the corner from Terracina there's some parking along the wall, and there's a parking area here. And here are a couple of comparisons from what I found in the catalogs in the 50s to present day 2021. Now let's talk about the crime scene area itself and what police found. Starting with Cheri's vehicle. Police found newly checked out library books sitting on Cheri's passenger front seat. There was 3 books. Her driver's side door was left ajar. I don't know how far ajar, but maybe wide open. And the car had definitely been tampered with. So police found that one wire connected to the distributor was disconnected. There was greasy handprints on the outside of the panel of the trunk. So obviously somebody came and opened it up, fiddled with her engine there, pulled a wire, and according to police and what they deduced is that the perpetrator, after he pulled the wire, hid in the shadows or hid somewhere in there and waited for Cheri to start her vehicle. And then perhaps he walked up to her then when he can hear her turning the engine or turning the key over. Hey, you need help? And then that's how maybe he broke the ice, which is a valid theory. It's a fair theory. To me, it makes the most sense, especially if that wire was disconnected. 10 feet from Cheri's body was a wristwatch. The wristwatch appeared to be torn off of the individual, and it would fit a 7-inch wrist. Most likely broken off from the struggle. The wristwatch also had flecks of white house paint on it. And here's a photo of detectives searching the ivy there. It was reported that one of the groundsmen there on campus found a knife in the ivy. I haven't confirmed that, but you can definitely see them scouring through the ivy. On the History Channel's The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, the current detective on the case, Detective Jim Simons, allowed the crew to look at this plaster mold of the boot print lifted from the crime scene that morning, and it is said to have been an 8 to 10 size military issued boot. Now, being that the window was halfway rolled down and it was nighttime, one theory would be, to me, is that Cheri got in the vehicle, tried to start the car up, it would not start. She locked the door either before or after she realized she had a problem. And then this man walks over to her driver's side. Maybe she can see him approaching from that alleyway. And she didn't want to unlock the door at first, so maybe she rolls down the window halfway just to talk to this guy because she was still kind of on edge. Maybe he startled her, whatever the case may be. It just appears to me that she rolled the window down after she exited the library. And that would make the most sense to me, is that she didn't recognize this stranger coming up to her car, at least until more light shined on him. Autopsy findings. Dr. Renee Modglin is the doctor that performed the autopsy on Cheri, and it was Halloween day that he did so. A direct quote from Dr. Renee Modglin was, "The state of rigor mortis, postmortem lividity, and body temperature at 9:23, 31st October 1966 indicated she had been dead between 9 and 12 hours. In the Inside Detective magazine, November of 1968 edition, there was a piece written by John Montgomery covering Cheri's case. It was 2 years removed from the actual murder. And to me, the closer the information to the actual crime would seem to be more accurate than information passed down over the 55 years. So I'm going to read here what John Montgomery wrote in regards to the autopsy. Dr. Renee Modglin, a famed autopsy surgeon and pathologist under contract to the coroner's office, was summoned to the scene of the crime. He performed a partial autopsy on the spot. The autopsy revealed that the 5 feet 3 inch, 110-pound girl had been slashed 3 times across the throat. One savage slash had severed the jugular vein. She had also been stabbed twice, once in the chest and once under the left shoulder blade. Her once pretty face had been slashed across the left cheek and upper lip. Cheri's autopsy report is extensive, and if you go to zodiacciphers.com, they break it down really well. There were wounds on her face, her breasts, her back, and including her throat. So it was vicious. It is my belief that between 10:15 and 10:40, that was Cheri screaming. So the fatal slash was the slash of her jugular vein in her neck. Apart from all of these multiple injuries, these slashes and cuts, she was also kicked in the head. So it was very, very violent. 9:23 p.m. to 12:23 a.m., which again lines up with the theory that perhaps she was killed, or the attack took place somewhere after 10. And she put up quite a fight. There was skin under her fingernails, as well as hair clenched in her right fist. And from that, it was concluded that her attacker was a white male. And here's Detective Steve Shumway, who is now retired. He was on the case in the 90s. And as he mentioned in that episode, the campus has changed drastically over the 55-year period. Over the years, there's been some different diagrams and different discussions as far as where the location of Cheri was when she was found, the actual crime scene. And it wasn't until recently that, doing some more digging, I found those aerial photos of RCC from probably the 50s that I talked about earlier. Because initially I thought the crime scene was probably 20 to 30 feet away from where I found that it was. So as you can see here in these photos, the proximity of the crime scene was right about here. But for me, just to be in this vicinity and covering this topic, covering this case, I can put my own eyes to it, my own ears to it, and just get a sense of how I envisioned how that night went. Whatever thoughts, it's multiple thoughts, multiple theories, but just to kind of take it all in. And me and the fellows met out here, and Jose was on controls to get this beautiful aerial coverage. And even bringing it home, looking at everything we've got, it just allows you to think more at the possibilities. But at any rate, here we are near the library entrance and where Cheri parked, where the 4 men were hanging out across the street from Cheri in the general vicinity. So for me, it helps build things in my mind as far as what happened. On November 29th of that same year, Riverside PD receives what they called and what was titled the confession This was a letter typed on carbon paper, and it was deduced that it was typed on a stack of carbon paper, and the copy mailed to PD was somewhere near the bottom of the stack, and this makes it virtually untraceable, untrackable. So at any rate, the confession reads as follows. The confession. She was young and beautiful, but now she is battered and dead. She is not the first, and she will not be the last. I lay awake nights thinking about my next victim. Maybe she will be the beautiful blonde that babysits near the little store and walks down the dark alley each evening about 7. Or maybe she will be the shapely, blue-eyed brunette that said no when I asked her for a date in high school. But maybe it will not be either. But I shall cut off her female parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. But don't make it too easy for me. Keep your sisters, daughters, and wives off the streets and alleys. Miss Bates was stupid. She went to the slaughter like a lamb. She did not put up a struggle, but I did. It was a ball. I first pulled the middle wire from the distributor. Then I waited for her in the library and followed her out after about 2 minutes. The battery must have been about dead by then. I then offered to help. She was then very willing to talk with me. I told her that my car was down the street and that I would give her a lift home. When we were away from the library walking, I said it was about time. She asked me about time for what? I said it was about time for her to die. I grabbed her around the neck with my hand over her mouth and my other hand with a small knife at her throat. She went very willingly. Her breast felt very warm and firm under my hands. But only one thing was on my mind. Making her pay for the brush-offs that she had given me during the years prior. She died hard. She squirmed and shook as I choked her, and her lips twitched. She let out a scream once, and I kicked her head to shut her up. I plunged the knife into her, and it broke. I then finished the job by cutting her throat. I am not sick, I am insane, but that will not stop the game. This letter should be published for all to read it. It just might save that girl in the alley, but that's up to you. It will be on your conscience, not mine. Yes, I did make that call to you also. It was just a warning. Beware. I am stalking your girls now. CC, Chief of Police, Enterprise. And the letter spoke of details of the crime. Now, it very well could be the perpetrator, it very well could be the killer, but at the same time, the media had already released details of this crime that very week, even the very next day and the day after. So it also could have been someone that read the paper that decided to write this confession letter. During this time, there was a man of interest, a person of interest that the police were looking into, but it wasn't enough to arrest him. I came across an interesting thought from FBI profiler John Douglas regarding the crime, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. According to John Douglas, the crime scene was left in some disarray. There was no attempt to clean anything up, and it also appeared that Cheri put up more of a fight than the perpetrator expected. And because of this, John Douglas thinks that the perpetrator was young and or an unsophisticated killer, not a true disorganized personality. Now that very well could be true, but it also could have been he's okay with leaving that stuff behind, because even in 1966 there were no cameras, no cell phones to take any kind of surveillance of the crime, and DNA wasn't even a thing then. I mean, yeah, it was collected, but it really wasn't a thing, so maybe the killer didn't really care about this type of stuff. In December of 1966, a custodian at RCC found a poem written on top of a wooden desk. Police documented it, took photos of it, so forth. Another thing that John Douglas mentioned was that anniversaries of crimes tend to stir up more emotions from people, from the perpetrator, from the witnesses. So when the Riverside Press Enterprise wrote a story on it 6 months after the crime, 3 letters were sent out from someone. One arrived at the Riverside Press Enterprise, one arrived at Riverside Police Department, and one arrived at Joseph Bates' house. There was a renowned handwriting expert by the name of Sherwood Morrill, and he worked in the Question Documents Department of the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, and he was directly associated with the Zodiac case. So Paul Avery is able to get those 3 letters, the one to Joseph Bates, the one to the Press Enterprise, and the one to Riverside PD, to Sherwood Morrill. And from that, Mr. Morrill deduced that those 3 letters, as well as the famous desktop poem, as well as all of the other correspondence from Zodiac, or from allegedly Zodiac, that they all came from the same author. In regards to suspects, Riverside Police Department had a guy that they called Bob Barnett. They didn't want to give his real name at the time, and they were looking at him because, according to witnesses and reports, he had some type of relationship with Cheri. Cheri ended up getting engaged to a guy named Dennis Highland. And according to reports, she had to break the news to this Bob guy, and that caused some rift between the two. Shortly before Cheri's death, it had been reported that Bob and Cheri got into a very heated argument publicly in front of people, and she called out to him when him and some buddies were playing basketball. And according to a witness, Bob said, "That bitch is going to the library."